I would like everybody watching this video to brace themselves because this is possibly going to be my most in-depth review ever, and also probably more than you'll ever hear anybody else ever talk about this movie. But today's film is one that I have been waiting 8.5 years for. And since the resulting movie has copped so much critical revilement, I have found a lot to say on that. So, here we go.
Ho 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 ho! Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Welcome back everyone, and today I'm going to be talking about everybody's least favorite action film of 2023. Now, when I first started getting into movies, I found myself very heavily drawn to the over-the-top action films of the 1980s, primarily those featuring either Sylvester Stallone or Jean-Claude Van Damme, who, ironically enough, fought each other as the primary hero and villain in the second Expendables movie. When the first Expendables movie was announced in 2010, I saw a film which was tailor-made for me. And then when they made a second and third one, I was just over the moon. To say that I'm obsessed with the Expendables movies is a phenomenal understatement. In 2015, I landed a role in a musical based on the Hunger Games simply because I wanted to get the role played by Liam Hemsworth after I had seen him in the second Expendables movie. That was a movie I watched the morning I went for my black belt, which I ended up getting. And my first ever tattoo is literally a variation of the Expendables logo. As such, I would argue that I am one of the most educated people to talk about today's movie.
I was made for this, bruh.
In the 8.5 years I waited for the Expendables 4, I was watching for updates every step of the way. They had been talking about trying to get Clint Eastwood, Jack Nicholson, and Jackie Chan into the film, while Dwayne Johnson, Pierce Brosnan, and Hulk Hogan all actively tried to get on board. Jean-Claude Van Damme even tried to come back and play the twin brother of the villain he portrayed in the second movie, as he's been known to do. That would have been fucking awesome. Unfortunately, the movie they delivered in the end was ultimately a hollow shell of the former glory days the series had. A lot of people would argue that the series never had any glory days, but to that I say, get fucked. The closer we got to the release of this movie, the more I began to realize that point blank, this was not going to be an Expendables movie. This was going to be a Jason Statham star vehicle with a number of glorified cameos at best. And that's been one of the biggest subjects of this film's criticism, because the entire franchise's gimmick was seeing a number of old-fashioned action heroes and legendary actors teamed up and kicking ass together. And by the point of this movie in the series, instead of commanding the big names we had once upon a time, like Mel Gibson, Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Harrison Ford, we've ended up with Megan Fox, Jacob Scipio, and Levy Tran. And you'd be forgiven for not knowing who the fuck that last name was, because I had no idea either. This movie actually entered production as an intended spin-off called The Expendables: A Christmas Story, centered around Jason Statham, which despite being a ridiculous movie title would have been a way more appropriate title. They ultimately called it Expend4bles, which is equally ridiculous, but nonetheless, this actually started entirely as a different project from a script titled High Value Target, which had nothing to do with the Expendables and was reworked multiple times until it just barely qualified as something the studio was able to pass off as an Expendables movie. Sylvester Stallone actually had no role in the screenplay, despite being one of the writers on the first 3 movies. He did touch upon the screenplay once upon a time, but they instead ended up going with a revision of the screenplay written by the guy who wrote Moonfall, and I don't know if you saw that movie, but it fucking sucked. Stallone actually had disputes with the franchise creative direction for years and left the project once upon a time before he decided to come back, and ended up deciding that he was going to pass the franchise on to Jason Statham and reduce his own role to little more than a glorified cameo, which is fair enough. And you go in with that knowledge, you might appreciate the movie a little bit more, which I did. Ultimately, a lot of people didn't and were just really pissed off that he had very little screen time. Partially because the studio really heavily marketed Stallone as being in the film. And even franchise composer Brian Tyler didn't return for this movie. He was too busy working on the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which I'm yet to see, and Fast X, which was a surprisingly depressing low point in the Fast and Furious franchise. And that's a real bummer for me, because his work as a composer on the series has been one of my favorite aspects of it. The title track on the second movie, The Expendables Return, is my absolute battle cry, and I have listened to these soundtracks so many times. So with the franchise losing out on its central gimmick, namely most of its cast, losing out on its original composer, losing out on Sylvester Stallone as the creative force driving the franchise as its star and screenwriter, there is just not really anything left to it to say that it's going to be an Expendables movie, except for the fact that they titled it as one. But there's one more problem we need to acknowledge, and it is the director. Now, the first movie was directed by Sylvester Stallone, who has proven himself as a capable director, particularly of action movies. The second film in the franchise, arguably the best, was directed by Simon West, who gave us the iconic 90s blockbuster Con Air, as well as the remake of The Mechanic, which personally I thought was better than the original. The third movie in the series was directed by Australian filmmaker Patrick Hughes, who despite having a more limited filmography, displayed that he's very competent when it comes to framing action scenes, as he did on that movie, as he did on The Man from Toronto, and as he did on The Hitman's Bodyguard. Instead, we ended up getting Scott Waugh for the fourth movie. That's the guy who directed the highly forgettable Need for Speed movie, and Act of Valor, a movie which cast Navy SEALs and was just so goddamn forgettable that even when I go back and rewatch the action scenes from it, I just have nothing good to say about it. I knew I was not going to get what I wanted going into the series, but all I wanted was a decent action B-movie at best. Now, New Image has already fucked up that promise for me once before when they released Rambo Last Blood. A movie so separated from what Rambo is about to any capacity and full of some of the worst action I have ever seen in my life, to the point that I would rather deny its existence. And I just hoped that they would not make the same mistake with the Expendables 4. Did they? Well, let's find out. The Expendables 4 opens in Libya. A bunch of nameless soldiers begin getting shot and blown up, including a tank that explodes prior to the missiles making any contact, before Indonesian martial arts superstar Iko Uwais walks onto the scene, shooting a few people.
Where is General Fizan? Tell me.
Well, he didn't tell you, he just looked vaguely in that direction. And also, since you already shot him, presenting a new weapon really doesn't present the kind of badass threat you think it does. The scene just cuts there, crossfading to a shot of Sylvester Stallone riding his bike out of the garage. And this shot has nothing to do with anything at all. My boy Josh turned to me and said, "Oh, is that meant to convey Sylvester Stallone leaving the franchise behind?" My guess was as good as his. And these first few minutes are already a big display of the ineptitude that went into making this movie. First of all, every Expendables movie is meant to open with a rescue mission. The first movie had them rescuing hostages from pirates. The second one had them rescuing Arnold Schwarzenegger and destroying everyone on the way in and the way out. And the third had them breaking Wesley Snipes out of a mobile prison train. So we've already had the movie breaking established formula by showing a villain we don't know killing a bunch of nameless characters we don't care about. Secondly, to just cut the scene right there, that disrupts any kind of potential rhythm, also refusing to allow the audience any time to figure out if they should care about what's happening or who it's happening to or why. And considering the next scene is mostly Jason Statham arguing with Megan Fox, the shortcomings just continue.
Gina, please, calm down.
Oh, me calm down? Did you just tell me? Don't tell me to fucking calm down, I'm calm!
This doesn't work as sincere drama, this doesn't work as comedy, this doesn't even work at an ironic level. They've already shown that the primary female character they're putting in this film is going to be shoehorned into being the annoying ex-girlfriend stereotype.
This is not making me happy.
Oh, look at me! I'm English! I'm avoidant! I don't like to argue! Well, guess
I
what?
just want a little peace in my life.
I'm from America, bitch! We're gonna fucking fight about it!
She really can't shut her mouth, can she?
Granted, the chemistry between Statham and Stallone is as solid as ever, so their work gives the scene a much-needed touch of comedic banter, but Fox gets the short end of the stick here.
I've got your skills and then some, and neither of you like it because you're both cavemen.
She's talking to you.
Actually, she's looking in your direction.
I'm talking to you. But about you. You might be my boss, but I can tell that you're also from this planet called Hopeless,
Where intimate relationships and feelings don't fucking exist!
Apparently, she does not know how to communicate without doing this over-the-top hand gesture every few seconds. Maybe that's why their relationship is in jeopardy.
I lost my ring at this bar, and I needed you to...
I'm sorry, is that it? Are we done talking? Are you done with this conversation?
Well, I mean, you walked off. Also, I found it very distracting in this scene that we cut between two older gentlemen whose faces are visibly aged and Megan Fox whose face is impeccably smooth and neatly polished. And I'm not judging anyone for using makeup or having work done. I'm just saying that when it's this level of up close and personal with the camera, it's very noticeable and also distracting.
She's an expendable, Christmas.
It's interesting that he says this because despite her being an expendable, she doesn't even go on the first action mission with them. She just shows up to be the annoying ex-girlfriend and not to kick ass like she should in a fucking action movie.
Lame.
Barney Ross and Lee Christmas ride to a bar where they attempt to reclaim Barney's lucky ring that he lost in a bet.
My friend here loves his ring. Since you choose to be, Barney, what's the word?
Obstinate.
Too long.
Dumbbells.
Dumbbells. You leave me no other choice.
Ooh, here comes violence!
Stallone spoke on his Instagram about how this scene was choreographed to be an old-fashioned punch-on instead of an elaborate fight, and I can respect that.
My turn, bitch!
Wonder Woman!
Come on, Chuck. Come on, cowboy. Bring it.
As enjoyable as their banter is, given that Stallone has a heavily reduced role in this scene, he probably could have thrown at least one punch. Also, that's the only time you'll see him actually draw a gun in this movie. He doesn't even do the iconic gun move that we saw in the previous entries.
You know, I really didn't need this love fest.
I like spending time with you.
Gay!
Then we cut right back to the star of the raid, in a scene where his right-hand man shows off more martial arts prowess than he does. We do get a few seconds of him kicking ass, and he proves more than capable in the scene, even with a touch of shaky cam and quick cuts, but almost immediately we again cut away, back to Barney's airplane hangar. The editors on this movie seem yet to figure out the fact that you can let a scene play out in its entirety before just abruptly cutting away. They've done it multiple times already, and we're not even 12 minutes in.
Hey, is this the new guy?
Hey, it's Easy Day. Good man, ex-Special Forces.
Hey, Vaughn.
Hey, Easy.
And this is how we're going to introduce new members of the team now. We're not going to give them any momentum or hype, we're just going to drop them on the screen.
Well, guys, remember this face. Don't shoot it by accident.
You don't have to worry about me.
Nobody was.
Who's this guy?
You're slipping, pal. You hired him. That's Galgo's son.
Oh, right. Barney hired him before the movie and then just completely forgot about it.
Oh, how convenient.
I have the eyesight, the heart, and the sex drive of my father.
Tell me he doesn't talk as much as his father.
He's worse.
No.
Twice as bad.
Alright, first of all, I don't understand why instead of getting someone like Michael Paré or Michael Dudikoff or Michael Biehn, they cast an actor whose biggest credit to date was playing the bad guy in Bad Boys for Life, which we probably all forgot he was in at this point, despite that being a fucking awesome movie. And secondly, if you are going to cast him, maybe don't have him do an impression of Antonio Banderas' character from the third movie. Only Antonio Banderas should play Antonio Banderas, because no matter how good Jacob Scipio's impression is, give him his own fucking character. That way we aren't constantly being reminded of a better character and a better actor from a better movie. Oscar nominee Andy Garcia walks in to replace the role previously filled by Bruce Willis and Harrison Ford. Honestly, the role of the CIA operative has been the most expendable one of the series, and now they've had to fill it with a guy from The Godfather 3 because they can't get any actual action heroes to do it.
Meet Suharto Ramat, former British national turned arms dealer. He has his own private army, and he's been hired to steal some detonators for nuclear missiles for a very dangerous client. Word on the street is, the client's name is Ocelot.
Context is for kings.
Operation Ocelot.
Mm-hmm.
When are you going to tell me?
When you stop playing footsies with your girlfriend.
Hey, why is Christmas so pissed about this Ocelot mission?
Oh, sorry, was he particularly pissed? Were we meant to see a scene where Jason Statham got pissed? Did the filmmakers just cut that?
Years ago, the CIA hired Barney to find out who codename Ocelot actually is. He was close when somebody walked him into an ambush and nearly killed his entire team.
Damn.
Yeah, some say Ocelot's a ghost that Barney created to cover his own ass for a mistake. No fucking way.
That certainly is a lot of exposition.
Ocelot exists, and Barney will bury him someday.
What the fuck happened to your ear, man?
I'm glad you asked me that.
You know, for all the shortcomings in storytelling with this film, 50 Cent playing 50 Cent is actually one of the better elements, and it's frankly one of his best movie performances. The team flies off to stop the baddies while pseudo Galgo refuses to shut up.
You know what he's a golden shot?
He's weak.
The woman,
She squats down on top of you and releases her bladder. It's very liberating.
You sicken me.
Too much of that.
Time for music.
Nigga. I'm 100% nigga.
It's Sudi.
Nigga.
Where'd that come from?
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
I doubt it.
Get creative.
Got it.
I really wish the writers of this film listened to themselves with that line.
Sir, I have a new transport.
Excellent. Tell us what we have done.
It is very obvious that neither of these actors have English as their first language, and when you pair it up with terrible dialogue and terrible direction, then despite their best efforts, them battling against the language barrier proves to be one of their biggest struggles in this movie. Gunner goes off on his own to operate as the sniper, missing both times. And I know Dolph Lundgren has been one of the major comic reliefs of this series, but there is a way to utilize that isn't just him fucking everything up on the first mission, okay? Eventually he starts getting things right as the film turns into a proper action scene, loaded with practical stunts and a number of notable green screen shots, but two things don't sit right with me in this scene. First of all, the chase scene through a featureless warehouse is an overused feature of many cheap action films, but more notably, we already had one of those in the third movie. And I know you can only have car chases in so many locations, but the changing locations has been one of the more appealing things about each Expendables movie. Here we're just doing the same thing all over again to diminishing returns. The majority of this chase is a pretty unremarkable back and forth of vehicles chasing and shooting at each other without any creativity thrown in there. It all feels too routine, too familiar, and the scale of the scene should be bigger with a more diverse display of action going on at once.
That's gotta hurt!
The other thing missing in this scene is the music. One of the most endearing things about the action in the first three Expendables movies is the fact that Brian Tyler's music knew exactly how to capture the mood of each scene, and moments like this were way more exciting with him doing that. But instead, this film features the compositional work of Guillaume Roussel, whose previous credits include the Kevin Costner film 3 Days to Kill, and Outcast, that Nicolas Cage and Anakin Skywalker fantasy movie that nobody saw. Without a composer who knows what the action needs, the mood falls flat consistently.
What the fuck, Easy?
Watch your profanity.
I will say, casting 50 Cent and naming his character Easy, like that of Eazy-E, another iconic rapper, that does actually give me a chuckle as a fan of hip-hop, and particularly NWA. One thing missing the entire time in this action scene is any real presence from Barney Ross. Stallone's character just keeps circling the plane. He doesn't try to land and join the action, or even fire back most of the time. He literally just goes in circles.
Stay on mission, Christmas.
You're toast up there!
Get the detonators, Lee. That's an order.
Fuck no, I'm saving your dumb ass.
Will you watch your ruddy language? My ears are not a toilet.
Instead of going for the detonators, Statham crashes his vehicle in a surface-to-air missile launcher to save Barney. But Ramat fires at the plane, causing it to go down.
Another happy landing.
As Barney's body lays in the rubble, Dolph Lundgren isn't even in the scene, but they did put in a shot of him running to pretend like he is, even though that appears to be the exact same shot of him running we saw earlier. This entire scene is just unremarkable as an action scene and completely soulless, and things don't improve in the next scene.
So when are we going after the guys that did this?
You ain't going nowhere. You're done.
What's that mean?
You're off it. You're done. You're out.
This is a bad joke.
It is one thing for Scott Ward to not know how to direct drama, but it is another for him to go completely against the franchise in failing to realize that the Expendables would not kick Statham off the team for doing what he did. Granted, they aren't actually the Expendables anymore because there's only 3 of the original members left on the team now, but nonetheless, if you actually watch the movies in the franchise, you would know this is not a decision they would agree to. In the third Expendables, when Barney broke up the team, Christmas told him these exact words.
Hey, you think you just pulled a plug and that's it?
Just did.
Yeah? Well, it doesn't work that way!
What?
We've been through the mud, the shit and the blood, and I've saved your ass more times than I can count.
And when Barney was preparing to take on Stonebanks alone at the end of that movie, Christmas personally rallied the team back together.
You were stupid enough to get yourself into this mess! We're the only ones crazy enough to get you out of it!
Barney would have never wanted Christmas off the team for making the mistake of trying to save his life. And to pretend otherwise is a big betrayal to the franchise and a big fuck you to fans.
Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. You're cool. And fuck you, I'm out.
It was Barney's sacrifice to make, brother. Good death for the mission, it would count. And you just took it from him. Made his sacrifice worthless.
Oh, you're gonna give the eulogy easy? You barely know who Barney is. The only reason you joined the team in the first place is because Terry Crews vehemently refused to return to the team after series producer Avi Lerner threatened to blackmail him in exchange for him dropping the lawsuit against Sylvester Stallone's agent Adam Zenit for sexually assaulting him, which ultimately that cunt got away with anyway. So, You know, no one really won in that situation. This scene is directed and shot without any feeling whatsoever. There is no emotion to any of the characters or the cinematography. What should be an emotional moment just plays out so routine and uncreatively.
Hey. Nothing Barney did was worthless. You understand? Nothing!
Hey, easy,
easy.
That delayed reaction probably should have come a minute ago, Gunnar. It just feels like it came out of nowhere here. Every Expendables movie has had one really emotional moment in it. Whether or not you felt the drama to be sincere, the first 3 films offered real emotional moments to its characters. The first had Mickey Rourke's monologue about the time he let a Bosnian woman commit suicide, which has haunted him forever, and the third had Terry Crews getting shot by Mel Gibson as the entire team struggled to keep him alive. On occasion, both these scenes have actually brought me to tears. Partially because I'm a diehard fan of the series, but also because there was a lot of sincere craft behind the filmmaking, the atmosphere, and the acting in those scenes. There's also Liam Hemsworth's execution in The Expendables 2. All these moments were powerful and emotional, but none of them should hold a candle to the moment where Barney Ross, the literal star of the franchise, goes down in a plane crash. And you know, I knew Scott Wall wasn't going to craft an Expendables movie, but I at least hoped that if there was going to be drama in the film, that there would be some kind of sincerity behind it.
But that's not the way it happened.
But even though The Expendables 4 can't offer us any time to mourn for Barney, it sure found time to have a scene where Christmas takes private security detail for a social media influencer. You know, I watch these movies for escapism away from the real world, not to be reminded of the people that I vehemently dislike about it. But you know, when it comes to good direction, Scotty doesn't know. Whatever, once Christmas beats the shit out of this guy, the joke is over. He breaks into his ex-girlfriend's apartment to find out about his ex-team's next mission, and this scene turns into an exchange of lazy romantic comedy banter and a wrestling match between the two that ultimately concludes at the end of a supposed sex scene where Megan Fox is visibly clothed without the film even trying to hide it.
This sucks!
The first Expendables movie had Jason Statham beating the ever-loving shit out of a bunch of guys on a basketball court because one of them assaulted his ex-girlfriend. And the 4th movie in the series has the writers trying to jam romantic comedy in there. It's an action movie! This scene was also prominently featured in the first trailer they released, which was a major red flag.
When I first met Barney, straight out of the SAS. Nothing to my name, down on my luck. Took a chance on me, but no one else would.
That's supposed to mean something?
Christmas gives Gina his knife, which he's planted a tracking chip on, and then we catch up with the team, who have inexplicably added a new member.
What goddamn language is that?
Who the fuck are you?
At no point in this scene do we even get a fraction of an understanding who this new team member was. I thought it was lazy the way they introduced Easy Day and Little Galgo, but with Lash they just didn't even try. Lee makes his way to a heavily green screen Thailand, searching for an old friend of Barney's named Daisha, who reluctantly agrees to help him on his mission.
If what you say is true, Barney should have his revenge.
Then we cut back to Andy Garcia explaining the mission to his team with so little charisma or effort that at times I felt like he actually slept through his own performance. Basically, the villain Ramat and the mysterious Ocelot plan to detonate nuclear warheads on a boat in Russia's Far East and disguise it as an American aircraft carrier starting World War III.
Since you Neanderthals digged up that last mission in Libya without me, I'm gonna be coming along to babysit you this time.
Sincerity's overwhelming.
I think I'm gonna win.
But we're gonna identify, kill, capture both Ocelot and Ramat, secure the detonators and the nuclear components. Helo extract. Any questions?
Yeah, when's lunch?
The team parachute down onto a ship which conveniently has no hostile forces present, meaning they don't have to battle anyone. You know, in an action movie. They walk right into a trap, meaning that once again the team are stifled by enemy forces.
Oh! Bitch got me again, motherfucker!
Once upon a time, the Expendables were meant to be the best of the best. They shot their way through the first 3 movies with only one casualty along the way. And yet in the 4th movie, they fucked up their first mission and immediately fucked up their second. And yet I can believe it, because, like I said, they're not the Expendables anymore.
This has been a shit-ass day.
Daisha takes Christmas to the ship and leaves him to the mission.
If I let the old me out, I don't know if I could ever get him back in.
You know, something could be done with this theme and that character, but it's also frustrating that it's an all too convenient excuse not to depict more action, even though that's Tony Jaa, the martial arts superstar from Ong Bak and Tom Yum Goong, and arguably one of the best martial artists working in the world of cinema today. Christmas ascends onto the boat as the only good guy with a gun, and that was when it hit me. This movie is just about to turn into Die Hard. It is going to adhere to the formula of a movie where a guy is trapped in a confined location and has to single-handedly shoot his way out and save the world. First of all, we already had Die Hard on a boat. It was called Under Siege, and that was a great movie. Secondly, the Expendables movies were never meant to emulate the formula of Die Hard. They were meant to be way more gung-ho and shoot them up in the style of Rambo 2. And, you know, I just have to wonder if Scott Waugh has ever actually seen another Expendables movie. If he has, I would be very surprised. I would love to see Jason Statham do Die Hard, but not in an Expendables movie. This is a film that promised one thing in its title and instead delivered Jason Statham on a boat. A much more appropriate title for this movie would be called The Expendables, Statham Takes Manhattan. Just like the 8th Friday the 13th movie, which promised to be set in New York, but instead had Jason Voorhees hacking and slashing his way through a boat full of people.
Who's my brother? So you can bring him on me.
Hello. This is the supervisor. You sound like Black Grover. You're gonna want to
Make sure that the only way you leave the ship is in a wonderful variety of pieces.
Please don't hang him. I lost him.
Christmas stabs and shoots his way through the ship, taking out everybody with so little resistance that there isn't much exhilaration to the action, even if it is captured reasonably well. But there does come a turning point, 58.5 minutes in, where Jason Statham decides to own a motorcycle which is rigged with 2 machine guns. For the first time in the movie, things actually get over the top. It just took a whole hour to get there, and I'm not sure if this is a throwback to the 1982 action film Megaforce, which was a massive inspiration over the film Team America, but I like to think that it is.
Jump! You can jump! Buckaroo!
As Christmas continues dispatching with the enemies, he begins to face more resistance and the action does get progressively more exciting. And just when he's pinned down, the long overdue sight of Tony Jaa kicking some major ass is delivered. Finally, the complete absence of martial arts in the film is at least somewhat rectified by having a true modern action legend doing what he does best alongside Statham.
Thought you were done with this life.
It would be disrespectful to Barney's memory to let his brain die.
They team up and kick ass together. And finally, the movie begins to feel adjacent to what an Expendables movie should feel like. It's hard to redeem the first hour of the movie, but it's also hard not to appreciate the prowess on display here. While this is happening, the team manages to secure an escape through the ship's water release system by having Toll Road piss on it. Just like Scott Waugh pisses on the legacy of the series with another genital gag. There's actually a lot of those in this movie, and it's very lowbrow.
Hey, boyo, what's so funny?
Well, it's... Nah, you wouldn't be interested. It's too lowbrow.
No, I'm quite lowbrow.
Eventually, they all meet up again and discover the bomb can only be disarmed from the remote kill switch.
Dressing this ship to look like a U.S. aircraft carrier with a prime nuke about to blow up the coast of Russia.
It's going to start World War III.
Ah, that's a shame.
Clock is ticking. Let's lock and load.
Yeah, so we better get back to the action real soon.
Can you make us something loud and messy?
Does the Pope shit in the woods?
No, the Pope don't shit in the woods. Or next to a bed.
Why you gotta say shit like that?
No, he shits on the innocence and dreams of young boys all over the world by protecting the pedophiles that abuse them.
I don't know what you heard about me. What is that?
It's perhaps the most shameless use of IP I've ever seen in a movie. A boombox on a forklift playing a song by one of the movie stars. If it was anyone other than 50 Cent, I'd probably be more critical, but that man has always been nothing but shameless, and frankly, this leans into that very well. Also, if you look closely, this is an old-fashioned boombox, which doesn't have any Bluetooth capabilities. So that means that whoever sent this up would have had to have been carrying a 50 Cent mixtape on them at all times. And I can put it down to probably 2 characters. Either Easy Day, for obvious reasons, or possibly Gunnar Jensen, who found it on the street one day and thought, oh, this sounds like some kind of cool independent artist, I might have to appreciate this. This sounds like a genuinely bad parody of the Expendables theme. Brian Tyler's music has been missing the entire film, particularly in the action scenes, but right in this very moment, I couldn't have missed it more. I would unironically prefer if they actually used another 50 Cent song here. Seriously, Into Club would have been less embarrassing. Finally, the big battle begins. Everyone starts kicking ass, except Gunnar, whose ineptitude with weaponry continues to burden him, and us as viewers, at least until he succumbs to his alcoholism again. Gunnar trying to stay sober against all the adversity in the film is a theme that the filmmakers could have actually done something with if they bothered.
But that's not the way it happened.
Daisha and Lash team up to take on the mini-boss, and after a brief but nonetheless entertaining display of martial arts, our heroes emerge victorious.
That's odd. Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
This action scene only lasts 3 minutes, but we actually get to see each member of the team kicking ass. It's not enough, but it's something. It's choreographed, shot, and edited very well. And after waiting around for so long, I'm not gonna lie, I'll take what I can get. This was an entertaining moment. Christmas finally shows off with remark.
I see you like to play with knives.
I don't know what you heard about me. Put up this can't get $1 out of me.
Seeing these two go at it is pretty exciting, but I can't help but feel like they should have extended this scene a lot more. With Christmas delivering the execution, that brings this entire action scene with the fight and the shootout to a close at only 5.5 minutes. So just when the series finally starts to resemble what the franchise should be about, it gives up on it. Oh yeah, turns out Andy Garcia was Ocelot the entire time.
Hello, bye.
Oh my God, no, no.
Bye, bye, bye.
Terrible. Take a lap.
With 12 minutes left before the bomb goes off, Christmas destroys the villain's only means of escape.
You're like Genital Woods! Who's showing up when you're not wanted and refusing to go away?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Fucking hell. You know, if you drink every time they make a terrible genital-related joke in this movie, you may just get far enough away from sobriety to actually enjoy it.
Enjoy the show!
I've been trying to enjoy the show this entire time. The filmmakers won't let me. A few more people get shot in an unremarkable tail end of the action, and the heroes decide to escape on Daisha's boat. But Christmas stays behind to disable the ship.
I gotta turn this ship around. May my sacrifice count.
He drops anchor and fights till his last breath, ready to go down with the ship.
Looks like I'll be seeing you soon, Barney.
Suddenly, a number of missiles fly in before he goes to showdown with Ocelot.
This is above and beyond. This is next level.
Nothing about this film has been next level. It's been bargain bin the entire time.
Look what Santa brought me.
Looks like it's his time of the month again.
The fuck? Barney? Hey! I had it with the classics!
Somehow,
Barney!
returned.
You almost fucking killed me!
You're welcome.
This is the one moment in the script that I will give props to. This is an affectionate callback from that scene from the first movie.
Are you crazy? Gonna kill me?
You're welcome.
Barney reveals he faked his death to open up a classified file and drive Ocelot out of hiding. I don't know how any of this makes sense, but I'm confident the writers didn't either. I'm happy that Barney didn't die, especially in that chicken shit way, but this is just bad writing that doesn't warrant me using the engine to understand it. And how that fishing boat got away from this massive explosion in time, I don't know either. I actually had some stranger approach me in the cinema and ask how the hell they would have gotten away on time. I did not have an answer to it.
Salute to my friends who never quit.
Except that most of them did, and it was the right move. Hell, even your old friend Daisha didn't show up for this scene. I mean, they were able to get Lash, that girl you've literally never met before, but not the guy who apparently has an extensive past with you.
Only you could walk away from a blazing inferno with not a scratch on you. You are like a mythical bird raising up from the ash. I don't know how you do it.
Just a moment, just.
Okay, I am relaxed. I'm trying to talk to my hero over here. Would you give me some space, please? Easy day.
What the fuck are you looking at, little Galgo? He's over there. As a final note, Barney reveals that he faked his death by dressing Jumbo Shrimp, the guy he lost his ring to at the start of the film, up in his uniform and giving him the ring before parachuting to safety. And this is a very sour note. Jumbo Shrimp did nothing to warrant getting executed, at least nothing that we saw on screen, unless the filmmakers cut extended footage. So for Barney to throw him under the bus like that when he's shown himself to be a hero in the first 3 movies, you know what, I'm just gonna pretend that he didn't. Then the movie ends just shy of 89 minutes with the remaining 10 minutes for credits. So this really isn't a 99-minute movie. But it's finally done. So is The Expendables 4 a good movie?
That's a negatory good, buddy.
The Expendables 4 is not a good movie, but if you watch it in the right state of mind and with the awareness of the tumultuous circumstances that led the series to drop as low as it did, then it can still be an entertaining one. But to explain that, I want to go back and recount my opinion on the first 3 Expendables movies so we can see just how far it's fallen. When the first Expendables came to screens in 2010, it boasted a big gimmick with its cast, but it was similar to the 4th entry in a couple of ways. It's primarily a Sylvester Stallone action vehicle and focuses on his character more than anyone else, with all the others present to provide occasional moments of banter and a few glimpses of their own badassery in the action scenes. It's nowhere near as fun as a film with that cast should be, but it serves as a decent enough starting point for the series. Stallone gives the film a sufficient amount of action over its running time, but he also stops to give the film a few moments of serious drama, which does give it a touch of the postmodern Western feeling we saw in the film No Country for Old Men. Granted, that's not what audiences would ideally be looking for in what is meant to be an affectionate throwback to the action B-movies of the 1980s, but nonetheless, I feel like it delivered enough of those goods while also being a pretty affectionate drama which displays Sylvester Stallone's competency as a writer and a director. It made a sincere effort to have audiences caring about the characters, which gave it more heart than your standard action B-movie. And the action scenes were awesome with all their bloody glory, even if the lighting could have been better in some of them. The Expendables 2 is where the franchise peaked with what I will always consider one of the greatest movies I have ever seen. There are a few moments of drama in the story, but it is way more focused on being an over-the-top action thrill ride with a bigger scale, more exciting set pieces for the action scenes, and more banter between the team in the sequences in between the action. Director Simon West made an active effort to ensure that the cast actually got to share more screen time with each other in the action scenes, leading to a brilliant action climax where everyone is taking out terrorists in an airport while Statham has a fight scene with B-movie legend Scott Adkins and Sylvester Stallone has a showdown with Jean-Claude Van Damme. The movie is brief, quick, completely shameless in its over-the-top goofiness, and finds the perfect rhythm for thrills and cast chemistry in a way that few action films do anymore. The Expendables 3 is a more controversial one, and has largely been considered the nadir of the series, at least up until the point of the 4th movie. With a bigger scope of ambition and a longer runtime of more than 2 hours, this is one that drags on. The set pieces aren't as exciting, the action scenes are less inventive and short on blood because of the PG-13 rating, the entire middle section is devoted to a cast of youngsters that nobody came to see, and despite the best efforts to balance the drama of the first movie with the spectacle of the second, The Expendables 3 struggles to keep its momentum going over the 2 hours. That being said, whilst this disappointed me the first time I watched it, each subsequent viewing I found myself more forgiving of these flaws and more able to respect the sincerity behind the movie. And no matter what, that extended final action scene will always capture my attention. With the exception of Glenn Powell, who really nobody gives a fuck about in this movie, everyone in the extensive cast gets to kick plenty of major ass in the final action climax. You just have to make sure to watch the extended cut on home media. I've only ever noticed a few differences in it, but they make Stallone's fight scene with Mel Gibson and Statham's fight scene with the big henchman just that little bit more exciting. And then we get to the 4th entry. While the first 3 have been pretty technically proficient movies and have boasted a big name cast, 4 is where the ensemble loses itself, and the best thing you can hope for is a low-rent guilty pleasure. And even if you're gonna get that out of it, you do have to look past an absolute myriad of flaws. The first of the flaws has been obvious from before the film was released, the lack of a proper action ensemble. The addition of Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais offers the film some mild leeway, but they are the 2 biggest action newcomers in the film, and both get pretty minimal screen time, meaning their ass kicking is a mere tidbit in the scope of things. More screen time is given to Megan Fox, Jacob Scipio, 50 Cent, and Andy Garcia, none of whom are legendary action stars like the actors who once headlined the franchise. Gone is the literal gimmick that the franchise was built upon. For that exact reason, you cannot call this an Expendables movie, because there is very little Expendables in it. A lot of critics have been quick to point out that The Expendables 4 closely resembles a production by B-movie company Cannon Films, and that is no coincidence. Not only does this movie resemble the cheap and gimmicky action B-movies that company was known for, but there are several collaborators on this film who were involved in Cannon. Expendables producer, head of casting, and alleged sexual predator Avi Lohner actually started his career in the 1980s, opening New Metro Entertainment in South Africa to capitalize on cheap local labor, so that Cannon Films could shoot movies over there at reduced fees. They ended up making movies like American Ninja 2, Going Bananas, and Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold before they ceased operations in the late 1980s under pressure from the anti-apartheid forces. Another name is Boaz Davidson, who has served as the executive producer on all 4 Expendables movies and countless other productions for New Image. He worked with Cannon Films as far back as before they'd come to America, directing the Israeli cult classic Lemon Popsicle and its American remake, The Last American Virgin, which I highly recommend. But when comparing the Expendables 4 to Cannon Films, it unfortunately does not reflect the better period of the company's history. Rather than reflecting the pre-1987 period of Cannon Films that gave us genuinely exciting over-the-top action films like The Delta Force and Death Wish 3, this movie instead feels like the aftermath, when they were desperately trying to cut costs everywhere and release lower budget movies that were aiming for higher box office grosses, such as Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Death Wish 4. Both movies that are, ironically, the fourth entry in their series like The Expendables 4. I previously talked about Death Wish 4 and said that part of its charm was the fact that it had such big ambitions but was so often limited by its budgetary issues that it was hilarious. That gimmick does not translate to an attempted ensemble action film which claims to have a budget of $100 million but so often looks ridiculously cheap. And if this film actually has a budget of $100 million like Dolph Lundgren claims, then some serious investigations need to happen, because this movie looks way too cheap to be spending that much money on it. Many critics have pointed out that the visual effects in the movie are unconvincing, but to be fair, the movies have always cut costs on visual effects. The first three entries use CGI and green screen more sparingly, mostly for the cheap but serviceable blood effects in the first two. They're arguably less impressive in the third entry and heavier in quantity, but since a good portion of the action is practical, this is relatively easy to forgive. Nonetheless, they visibly overuse them in this one. In an effort to compensate for the lack of bloody violence in the third Expendables, they've put way too much of the bloody effects in this one, which, true to series tradition, looks consistently fake. And the overcompensated excess of them just makes that factor a whole lot louder. Evidently, this is the only thing that the producers listened to fans about wanting to see in the fourth Expendables movie, and they marketed the shit out of it in the trailers. They also marketed the shit out of Stallone's role in the movie, even though he's barely in it for about 10 minutes. The first major action scene in the film uses so much obvious CGI, green screen, and fake blood effects, which sets the movie off on a disappointing path that it never completely comes off of. The action in the second half is handled far better with more practical stunts and a better use of the team, but it's far too brief, the stakes aren't high enough, and it doesn't compensate for the shortcomings in the first half. The screenplay is also a dour low point for the franchise, even in a franchise where screenwriting has never been held to the particular highest of standards. The first three films at least knew what their gimmick was, so they gave audiences an old-fashioned action narrative and plenty of comedic interplay for the actors to work with. The fourth film pushes so many of its characters to the background that there are very few moments of banter to enjoy and appreciate. And even when they finally pop up, they're written to be such a low standard of dialogue that there is less focus on appreciating this and more lazy dick, balls, pee, and STD gags. Most of the film is just Jason Statham trying to find people to talk to, but he can't find anything interesting to say to anyone. And when the film makes its half-assed attempts to be emotional, the dialogue goes nowhere and Brian Tyler's music isn't there to enhance it. And ironically, this is the second time that the fourth entry into a Sylvester Stallone movie franchise lost a core part of its heart as a result of failing to bring back the original composer. When Rocky IV was getting made, Bill Conti was unable to return due to his commitments on the Karate Kid, so they had to get Vince DiCola instead, whose other iconic movie credit was the animated Transformers movie. And whilst his music was amazing in the training montage sequences and in the battle scenes, during the more low-key emotional moments, they were not a good fit. And when in 2021, Sylvester Stallone released his director's cut of Rocky IV, which was fundamentally a better movie in so many ways, he used Bill Conti's music during a number of the emotional scenes and thus made it feel way more like a Rocky film that was consistent with the rest of the franchise. Once again, by failing to bring back the original composer, this time in the case of The Expendables 4, the heart and the genuine feeling that the franchise should have are largely absent. As far as the screenplay goes, I can forgive an average story and mediocre dialogue, but my biggest gripe is the fact that the people who approved this draft of the screenplay have no respect for the fans of the series. They were graceless in their treatment of Barney Ross, the hero who carried the series for so long. They put way too much on the shoulders of Jason Statham, who despite being possibly the best action hero of his generation, does not deserve to single-handedly carry the weight of the film. The two others who actually came back for the fourth entry, namely Randy Couture and Dolph Lundgren, they're given less to do than Megan Fox and Jacob Scipio, the former of whom has almost no role in the action scenes, and the latter of whom goes from doing an Antonio Banderas impression into being completely silent for the entire middle section of the movie. The people who made this movie visibly didn't care about the screenplay. They found an unrelated screenplay that they've hastily reworked into what could vaguely be passed off as an attempted Expendables movie, and they didn't even allow Stallone's creative input in the screenplay, which is just pathetic. And as such, they had to mold that piece of shit writing around what few Expendables wanted to return for the movie. In doing so, they exhibited no care or concern for any of the characters in the slightest. They actually made the characters more mean-spirited, depicting Barney as someone who would literally throw another person under the bus to save his own life, despite the guy not deserving the death penalty, and Lee Christmas as a guy who would beat the ever-loving shit out of a guy on camera just because he's a misogynist. I can't stand Andrew Tate-esque influences any more than the next person, but even with all the other Expendables movies being shoot-'em-up ones, the bad guys who got hurt deserved it because they posed a legitimate physical threat, something that one could actually argue in court. The dialogue was lame, the banter was minimal, and there are way too many scenes of heavy exposition where some of the least interesting characters just monologue without any hint of emotion or rhythm with the story. But this is an action movie, so the other most important thing to address is the action. I've talked at length on this YouTube series about Hollywood's constant insistence on ruining action scenes to achieve a more PG rating or to try and hide the shortcomings of the actors. The Expendables 4 does not make these mistakes, thankfully, so fans of undemanding B-movie action can find a modicum of satisfaction out of the few minutes of action on offer in the movie. But the quantity is very low, and the quality most definitely does not match up to what we've come to expect from the rest of the series. The only action scenes from the first 3 movies I would levy any significant criticism at would be the warehouse chase scene and the drop scene from the third entry. The warehouse chase was extremely routine and lacked the creative display of versatile weaponry and combat seen in the franchise's better moments, whilst the drop scene was over and done without any real combat to it. The Expendables 4 decided to repeat the warehouse chase with a warehouse chase of their own, which was even duller because it suffered from diminishing returns, It also featured way more obvious green screen shots, much worse CGI effects, a far less interesting group of characters, and none of Brian Tyler's music to elevate the stakes. Between that scene and Jason Statham redoing Under Siege, there is nothing I would call action between it all. Once Christmas adopts a Megaforce motorcycle, the movie comes close to its expendable roots, with an over-the-top display of raw masculine action and a versatile display of different combat and weaponry stemming from the cast. That scene alone actually made the movie worth viewing for me, but it was still way too short. The majority of the action is just Jason Statham taking on the world, and it's handled with practical stunts and none of the quick cuts or shaky cam that make me detest modern Hollywood. But again, if I wanted to watch a Jason Statham one-man army film, I wouldn't watch an Expendables movie. There's a lot to criticize about the action in the Expendables 4, but the main problem is simply that there just isn't enough of it. I watched this movie 4 times in the lead up to this review, and I'll be honest, I did find each time I enjoyed the movie more because I knew when to tune out and when to tune in to enjoy the action. Nonetheless, there just should have been more of it. And now it's time to go through the cast of this film one by one and give you my detailed thoughts on their roles in the film. Jason Statham takes the reign as franchise lead this time around, carrying way too much weight on his shoulders in a starring vehicle trying to pretend that it isn't that. But he does what he does best, continuously kicking ass, delivering terrible dialogue with smooth charisma and a sense of humor, and sharing some enjoyable chemistry with his co-stars. This shouldn't be his movie, but the fact that it is proves to be a challenge that he rises up to, and Statham fans should find a lot to enjoy about it. Also, it's ironic that this is the second blockbuster sequel that Statham starred in this year alone, where nothing really happened of entertaining value until the last 30 minutes of action. After the Meg 2, The Trench. That movie sucked, minus that one moment when Jason Statham kicked that guy into a giant shark's mouth.
See you later, chum.
Unfortunately, I can't levy the same praise at Sylvester Stallone. I've talked about that man countless times on this series because he is genuinely my favorite movie star, and his easy charisma continues to work in the handful of scenes that he gets in this movie. But Barney Ross is treated with contempt by the writers. Nearly all his scenes are just lazy comedic banter, which he does very well, but there are no moments for Stallone to develop the drama and make his character's sacrifice meaningful in any way, even with the fact that it was a bait and switch. I don't fault Stallone for wanting to pass the franchise on to somebody else, but I fault everyone involved in the production for not giving him a more gracious departure. Barney could have faked his own death and declared his intentions to stay under the radar and move on from things whilst passing the torch onto Lee Christmas. That's a moment I would have appreciated seeing. But by the end of the movie, it's just declared that he's back from the dead and seemingly back with the team. He does a fine job, but like with the action scenes, there's just not enough of him. And in the action scenes, he is completely absent, never even doing that iconic gun move. Nonetheless, I expect that he will end up copping a Golden Raspberry Award nomination for Worst Supporting Actors because the Razzies really have it out for him, and they're absolute shit cunts about it. Seriously, he got nominated for Worst Actor for starring in Samaritan last year, even though his performance was consistently praised as the best part of a pretty average movie. Enter the Rapper. 50 Cent replaces Terry Crews and Wesley Snipes as the badass black guy in the series, and interestingly enough, he was almost given a role in the first movie. Wesley Snipes couldn't appear in the first Expendables because he couldn't leave the country due to his tax evasion. They offered the role to Forrest Whitaker, and he eventually dropped out before they offered it to 50 Cent, and eventually it ended up getting offered to Terry Crews. Now we've come full circle and brought 50 Cent back to the franchise. They couldn't get Danny Glover or Michael J. White or Carl Weathers into the movie, so they instead just decided, let's get that guy that sang in the club. And if you've ever actually seen 50 Cent act, you'll know that it is not his strongest skill. Even in a film like All Things Fall Apart, where he gave it his absolute all, including losing 54 pounds in 9 weeks to portray someone with cancer, the limitations of his acting abilities remained aggressively on display. I was personally hoping that in a film like Expendables 4, he'd show some more of the over-the-top energy that he brought to the videos where he taunted George Floyd.
If you could read one full page of a Harry Potter book, nigga, I'll give $750,000 to whatever charitable organization you want to. Fuck the bucket of ice, man.
But instead, he pretty much portrays the cartoon parody of himself we saw on the Boondocks.
I stepped those chairs. Or Dad Tran.
Predictably, 50 Cent isn't giving any material to work with, and even if he was, it'd be a stretch to expect him to do much with it. But he does what he does best. He plays 50 Cent, and for the least demanding of viewers, namely the kinds of viewers who would actually be watching an action ensemble movie with Curtis Jackson on the team, he delivers enough goods to get mild enjoyment out of it. Also, I have never listened to PIMP more times in my life than I have in the weeks following seeing this movie. When they announced Megan Fox was part of the cast, I was indifferent. I had never thought of her much as an action hero, but I was open to having my mind changed. And after seeing her lead role in the 2020 Lionsgate action thriller Rogue, I was confident she could do a solid job in the role. Unfortunately, working with Scott Waugh and a fundamentally uninspired screenplay, it's unsurprising that her character is little more than Statham's on-screen girlfriend, or just eye candy the rest of the time. The few memorable moments she brings include her annoying rant at the start, where she's just a plot point to drive the barrier between Statham and Stallone, and her extended wrestling match with Statham, which predictably turns into a love scene. Previously, the role of the girl on the Expendables team has been fulfilled by Yu Nguyen in the second movie and Ronda Rousey in the third. Both characters had subtle elements of romantic banter with other characters, but they weren't completely boxed into being a romantic subplot for the entirety of the film. Megan Fox is capable of more than this and has proven herself as an action hero in the past, but this movie does not make an argument for that. Dolph Lundgren is disappointingly wasted in Expendables 4. His character Gunnar Jensen has gone in a few directions with this series, but he's also been the subject of comic relief in the movies. Unfortunately, outside of his moments of chemistry with 50 Cent, he doesn't have much to show off this time around. His performance is reasonably okay, and it's also worth noting that Lundgren has been battling pretty severe kidney cancer since 2015, which may have inhibited his abilities, and he was shooting this movie on his time off from the Aquaman sequel, which would have limited his schedule, but he's nonetheless nowhere near as utilized as he was in the prior entries. He is completely wasted in the intro action scene, and the few moments he has in it are lazily green screen showcases of Gunner's shortcomings without a balance of badassery. There was room to do something with the character, because Lundgren himself stated that the character has been sober for several years and now on a philosophical soul search. And the fact that Gunner carries a flask on him at all times and succumbs to it mid-combat is something that a good filmmaker could have done something more with. But Scott Waugh is not a good filmmaker, nor one worthy of working with Lundgren. I liked his easy charisma, but he lacks the same powerful presence he displayed in the first three movies. Tony Jaa is one of the highlights of the movie. Predictably, his talents are wasted, and the fact that he has less screen time than most of his counterparts is additionally disappointing. But when he came on screen, a big smile came across my face. During his action scenes, he does get to show off some of the kick-ass martial arts skills that have made him a superstar. He deserves a bigger role and more screen time, particularly considering that he is the new martial arts star of the film following the departure of Jet Li. But the moments we get do show him doing at least a watered-down version of what he does best. Tony Jaa portrays Daisha as a likable guy who kicks plenty of ass when the filmmakers will let him. They just don't, and that's one of the stupidest fucking decisions they made in what is already a crowded canvas of stupid decisions. And Daisha is depicted as a character with a history with Barney Ross, where he was so violent that he was afraid to unleash his old self. This is the character that something could have been done with, and since Stallone has stepped away from the franchise after establishing his buddy chemistry with Statham as one of the most enjoyable gimmicks of the movies, it would have been nice if they could try and establish a similar relationship between two of Barney's oldest friends, united by his supposed death. Watching these two kick-ass together is one of the greatest moments in the film, and I hope that a much better filmmaker can utilize them both together in another film one day. Similarly to Jaa, Iko Uwais has his own talents wasted. Both of them are some of the best martial arts stars in the world of cinema today. You'll know that in particular if you've seen either of the Raid movies, which are simply put some of the greatest action movies ever made. But the Expendables 4 does the same thing that Hollywood has continued to do with him and just waste his talents. Just like in Star Wars The Force Awakens, he gets a few minutes of screen time to play a villain bereft of any personality whatsoever. And though he gets dialogue in this movie, Uwais does not act the best in the English language. He works very hard in the role, and his presence as an action figure works in the movie's favour, but the language barrier does affect his performance, unfortunately. His fight scene with Jason Statham is pretty entertaining, but if you're going to cast an Indonesian martial arts legend as the villain of an intended blockbuster, maybe actually do something with him? Iko Uwais has way too much talent for this movie, but you'd be forgiven for not thinking that based on how the movie treated him. If he at least got an additional fight scene with Tony Jaa, then I'd be slightly more happy. But for a master of Pencak Silat to wield 2 sharp batons and then have to spend most of the movie just talking whilst battling terrible screenwriters and the language barrier, let's just say you'd have to be a particularly stupid filmmaker to let that mistake happen. And that's exactly what Scott Waugh is. Randy Couture gets largely the same treatment as Dolph Lundgren. Despite sticking around for all 4 movies, Scott Waugh fails to show any appreciation for the man who once fought Steve Austin on screen. He's sure to recycle the cauliflower ears gag, which is an affectionate throwback for fans of the first movie, and he does get a handful of charismatic lines as well as moments amongst the action, but him and Gunner should have been the leaders of the team following Barney's supposed death instead of Megan Fox. I mean, he's a legacy member of the Expendables, and she didn't even go on the first mission in the film. The filmmakers decided to go down the toll road, and we are the ones that had to pay for it. And now we get to the absolute lowest part of the cast. The man who was one of the best parts of the worst Godfather movie, proving himself to be one of the worst parts of this supposed Expendables movie. Andy Garcia shows up, repeatedly delivers long monologues of exposition that he sometimes seems to be asleep during, says a handful of dick jokes, and never once gives audiences a reason to have any fascination with the character. And it's impressive that in a movie featuring 50 Cent, that an Academy Award nominated actor would show the least acting talent of the entire cast. He genuinely sucks anytime he's on screen, and he displays no affection for the material. This was little more than a paycheck for him, and I really hope the producers offered him a salary as low as the effort he put into the role. Like I said before, I don't respect the Golden Raspberry Awards at all. They nominated Mel Gibson for Worst Supporting Actor in The Expendables 3, even though he was universally considered the best part of that film. But if anyone deserves a nomination for this movie, it is Andy Garcia for that exact same award. Frankly, the franchise would have been way better if it cast Hulk Hogan as the main villain, which is what was teased at back in 2015. Forget the whole plot twist line. Just give him the central villain role and make Iko Uwais the martial arts sidekick like Scott Adkins was in the second one, and bury Andy Garcia at Ocean where he belongs. And now for the names that didn't even make the poster. Jacob Scipio really shouldn't be in this film. If he was gonna be in this film, he shouldn't be doing a Galgo impersonation. He does a great job of it, but the franchise already has one of those. And we know the man can act because he did it very well in Bad Boys for Life. But the role he gets given in Expendables 4 isn't the right one. And Levy Tran is the most forgettable member of the cast. I don't know why they didn't try and bring Yu Nuan back. She isn't bad in the role, and it's cool that they gave her a chain as a weapon, but in what little screen time she gets, there is nothing memorable about her. There has been talks for years about making a franchise spin-off called the Expendables, with an all-star team of ass-kicking girls taking on a mission, but that decision was scrapped in favor of adding more girls to the team in this movie. But if you're gonna do that, don't cast a complete unknown and then push her to the background. Surely you could have gotten someone like Linda Hamilton, or Pam Grier, or Cynthia Rothrock. And Darren Knopp, who doesn't even get a credit on Wikipedia, does nothing but kick plenty of major ass when he's on screen. The man's display of martial arts is consistently nothing short of stellar. But at the end of the day, I couldn't help but wonder, why couldn't we get some more cameos from actual action stars from Once Upon a Time?
Why? 'Cause fuck 'em, that's why.
Even Mike Dacascos. He's not doing way too much these days, even though he kicked major ass in John Wick 3. As a final note, this movie appears to be the end of the franchise. The series went largely in limbo when The Expendables 3 had disappointing returns in 2014, but this movie has only grossed $51 million on a supposed budget of $100 million, which means that after marketing costs, it has lost at least $150 million. It looks like Statham won't be continuing the series after all, which really isn't a shame. It didn't exactly die out in a blaze of glory, but at least it didn't end up being as shit as Rambo Last Blood, or A Good Day to Die Hard. You know, I'll at least acknowledge that The Expendables 4 exists while I refuse to acknowledge it as an Expendables movie. I won't deny that it was ever made like those other two. Nonetheless, there was no hype for this movie. Even though the studio tried the marketing campaign of doing the Barbie-style filter photos, I didn't see anyone making them. When I went to see this movie, there were only 3 other people in the cinema, 2 of whom came with me. The franchise has officially become too expendable for fans to appreciate.
I get it!
If you want a solid action film from this year that more closely resembles the glory days of the series, watch Extraction 2. That was a spectacular thrill ride, and a sizable improvement on an already solid predecessor. And this is far from one of the worst movies I've seen at cinemas all year. No, that award right now goes to The Emu War, Australia's answer to disaster movie, and I don't mean that in any good sense of the word. The Expendables 4 gets 4 terrible blood effects out of 10.
Ironic.
It has very little of the star power, action spectacle, or quippy dialogue that the franchise was built upon. But for the most undemanding fans of action B movies, or for Jason Statham fans, there are just enough spots in there to give it a little bit of rewatch value, even if they don't come close to comparing to the earlier entries. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. Thank you for sticking around towards the end of this long-ass rant. If you want to see any movies discussed on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, please hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos. I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.